And we are live. And welcome, everybody. It is episode 4 for 2021 of Get It. And today I have the privilege to chat to Claire Agutter. I don't know, Claire, I keep on wondering if I pronounce your surname right. And we've known each other for what, 4 years? Is it Agutter
yes.
or Agutter?
No, Agutter, you do it very well.
Okay, good. And I'm actually feeling a little bit nervous because she's a very experienced host also of the ITSM crowd stuff and CEO of ITSM Zone and Scopism. And then she's involved in a whole host of other interesting things. And it's one of those interesting things where I met Lee 4 years ago. And I'm privileged to call her a friend today. So, how did you end up in service management, Claire?
Purely by accident is the honest answer. So my career aspirations, I'll let you know when I figure out what I want to do when I'm grown up, because I've still not figured it out yet. But I left school with reasonable qualifications. I went to university without a clue as to why I was going to university or what it was going to help me to do. Dropped out after a year because it made no sense to me, and I was spending money rather than earning money, and I knew that I could earn money. Moved into retail roles. So I was working in IKEA. Then that changed to, because this was just as websites were starting to appear. So I got a job. It was in a call center, but it was answering emails from people who were shopping through the first website. So that was kind of a customer service job. That then I moved into an IT help desk job for a plumber's merchant. And then after that, moved to another help desk job. And that was the company that sent me on my ITIL 2 foundation. And that single training course, I think, is the one pivot point in my career that just set everything else in motion, because it made sense to me. Suddenly, this is something interesting. You know, I came running back to work and said, "Oh, we need a CMDB." And everybody looked at me like, yeah, right, whatever. And from there, moved into change analyst, change manager, service management implementation, consultancy, training. And then 14 years ago, set up my own training business, and here I am now. So if I kind of look back on my career, there's no sort of purposeful decision making. It's rather just a case of when something happens, I go, oh, I'll do that, and it usually turns into something interesting. Occasionally there's some money at the end of it as well, but mainly it's about doing the projects that are interesting.
No, I agree. I mean, it's much better to do something that feels meaningful than to have a miserable job that pays well.
It's nice to be able to eat and keep a roof over your head and things, but there's so, I mean, my husband gets quite cross with me sometimes, and he says I would quite happily work full time for free, but I think particularly in this industry, there's always community things going on, and you get involved and you see where it takes you. And sometimes the opportunity that comes is 10 years after the original project. You just didn't know that at the time when you started.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the beautiful things for me about the industry. And sadly, I do feel that it's busy changing, is this intimate sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's just because I'm older, and and start reminiscing about the good old days. Gosh, who knows? Yeah. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
I think I do think there is an element of the fact that we are older and now we are now the establishment. So we are the people doing podcasts rather than watching podcasts and giving presentations rather than going to presentations. And it's always a question for me is, where is the next generation of service management? Because you go to a DevOps meetup and I'll always be the oldest person in the room. And if I go to a service management meetup, I'm still quite often one of the younger people in the room. But when
yeah.
I did a couple of ITSM crowds recently, not plugging my own podcast on here, but
No,
I
you
put
can with pleasure.
I put because I did an episode with Daniel Breston and Ivan McFarlane, who are just on the verge of retirement, and that made me think about, well, where is the next generation? Who are the next generation? So I put a call out on LinkedIn and said, I want to host an episode with the next generation, and I want to ask people that question: how did you get into service management? Why do you like it? What do you enjoy? And we ended up doing 2 episodes because we got a lot of volunteers, but
Great.
that was great. And meeting, it's not even young people, but it's people who are new to the industry and hearing about their experiences. And they'd come from, one of them had a science background, one of them had been working in construction, but they'd found their way into service management as most of us do. It's not a deliberate decision because you don't realize this career exists. But they were really good episodes, and it kind of cheered me for the future of our industry because they were just amazing people.
That's awesome. George, it's actually interesting. I mean, if you think back 10 years, I think most probably Northampton was the only university with a program in service management. And today, maybe there's not a lot of programs in service management, but I mean, I teach service management for master's students at Nelson Mandela, and it's nothing strange. It's so it is interesting. Yeah, so we've become the establishment. What
Scary,
a
isn't it?
scary thought, hey? Yeah. So, but I mean, the two of us, our paths crossed with Verisum as we started looking at, I suppose, taking service management mainstream in business. So that was what, 4 years ago?
Yep.
Nearly 5 years ago, isn't it?
Oh God.
Yeah. Isn't that scary?
Isn't it?
It's just like, it feels like yesterday. But that sort of very quickly turned into this sense of urgency of to get organizations to understand that they need to pivot. They need to prepare for a digital age. And that was a subtitle of the books. But it wasn't. It was service management. Service. I can't even remember what the tagline was.
I think it's a service management approach for the digital age.
For the digital age, yes. Yeah, I knew digital age was in there somewhere. And then, I suppose a year later, every bloody person started doing digital transformation. And when we had a chat a few weeks ago about what should we talk about, you mentioned that it annoys you as much as it does me. So tell me a little bit about first of all, I suppose your experiences, because we need to have experiences before we can feel something about or have an opinion about something. I always say to people, just because I've got an opinion doesn't make me opinionated. They don't always agree, though. So what experiences made you realize that this is just a fad? Nobody is really doing what and now I'm generalizing. There's a lot of people that's doing what they should be doing, but the vast majority doesn't get it.
And a lot of it came from that Verism project, because while we were doing Verism, we had, that massive author group from all over the world bringing in experiences. And I was also visiting companies and interviewing people to learn more about what they were doing in terms of service management and how that was affecting the organization. And it was kind of strange, because we spoke to companies like Sky Betting and Gaming, Hermes, the parcel delivery organization, and these were organizations that had technology at the heart of the business. So everything that they were doing in terms of service management was what you would expect for that type of organization. Sky Bet had the budget that every employee got every year, so that they could spend it on robots or conferences or whatever they might want to do. Hermes was automating their parcel sorting infrastructure. What they were doing was amazing. And then we went to, and I don't want to call them legacy organizations, but organizations that are still very much structured with IT over here and the business over here. And they were standing up projects. This is our digital transformation project. This is our chief digital officer. This is the digital team. And it's this desire to put the word digital in front of everything, as if that makes it something new. And these projects are huge. They consume budget, resources, time, and quite often don't deliver anything, because they're not changing what's at the heart of the business. It's not something that you can just drop on a team, whether that's the IT department or your brand new digital team. You can't just drop it on them and say, in 12 months time or 18 months time, we must be digitally transformed. It's never going to work like that. And instead, it needs this kind of fundamental shift in how the whole organization operates. And this is what we tried to do with Verism. We had so much of the book is dedicated to leadership and to culture and to behavior and accountability. The actual processes and the steps and the life cycle is kind of the second half of it, because it's all about changing what we do and how we think and how we behave as an organization. And I remember very early on, we had the discussion in the author team about, do we even want to mention the phrase digital transformation? Because it does imply a project, a one-off thing that can be done and ticked off. And in the end, we said, yes, we need to use this terminology, because this is what the industry understands, and we're kind of stuck with it. You can't force people to change the language that they use. But when you actually dig into it, digital transformation is fairly meaningless.
Practically, if the way that it's done.
Yeah.
You know what it makes me think of? I'm a little bit older than you are. So in the mid-90s, everybody was busy doing business process re-engineering.
Yes.
And 80 to 90% of these projects failed. And I think it was the third book. It was only authored by, incidentally, if you heard that shout, it was an Egyptian ibis flying over the house.
Wow.
Yeah. They're the only birds with a built-in fear of heights. So whenever they fly up, they scream.
I wasn't sure if it was a cat or a child or what. I wouldn't have gone for Egyptian ibis, but there you go.
But Michael Hammer wrote the book on his own. And in that book, he said, the biggest problem with most of these digital transformation, business process re-engineering initiatives is that it isn't business process re-engineering. It was just called something. It was literally just a fad. And it annoys the hell out of me that everything, every bloody project today is a digital transformation project. And I then, sort of the first question that I ask, and what's leadership's involvement? What do you mean? This is IT. Okay, no, it's not.
No.
Yeah, yeah. Transformation can't happen to you.
And
Yeah,
it doesn't happen along a neat project plan either, because you'll know if you do any gardening, what you plant invariably isn't what ends up growing. You can't make these things happen. That there's so much more in terms of changes in how we structure ourselves, how we make people accountable. And this is where my mind's been going, particularly over the last 18 months, because there's that Twitter joke going around about who drove digital transformation in your organization. Was it the CIO, the CDO? Was it COVID? And it was COVID, because all of a sudden organizations are realizing, actually, when there's a genuine business imperative, these things that we were saying were impossible, can't be done, don't have enough time, well, actually, we did need to do them to keep running business as usual. And there's a huge opportunity here for me, for organizations to then reflect on everything they do. And I'm not just talking about technology now, I'm talking about staff, management, outcomes, everything. Organizations have this opportunity to look at what they do and say, could we do things differently? Could we do things better? Because we're not out of the pandemic yet by a long way. We're not back to normal, but there do seem to be companies who want to rush back to normal and just do exactly what they did before, when in fact we have this opportunity to question everything, and we should be doing that.
Yeah, I'm sometimes wondering, should we talk about digital transformation at all? Shouldn't we just talk about business transformation, or just transformation? Or actually, that tagline of the first Verism book is good: transformation for the digital age. Because when I was involved in COVID-5, the rewrite of COVID-5, and purposefully the base book, the name was changed, that it's enterprise governance of IT. It's not IT governance, because you can't make it IT's problem. Governance isn't an IT problem. And transformation isn't an IT problem, or a digital problem for that matter. It's an organizational problem.
Yeah. And because for us who've been in this industry for a long time, we've seen the changes that have happened in the last 10 years. So, when I started in service management, which is pretty much 20 years ago now, maybe a little bit more even, there was ITIL, and that was it. And it was done unquestioningly in so many organizations to very good effect. But generally within operations, and you still had your developers throwing things over the wall at 5 o'clock on a Friday and all the rest of it. But that was how things were at the time. There was Prince 2 as well. But then in recent years, the kind of the different ways of working have exploded, and we've seen DevOps and Agile and Lean IT and Green IT and Kanban and Kaizen and Abashi and Ubeya more and more, which has been the industries reacting to the importance of IT and trying to find the magic way to get it right. But you've kind of put the hammer on the nail, hit the nail on the head by saying it's about business transformation. And I've been doing a bit of associate work recently with an analyst company called Blur, BLOOR, and they have this concept of mutable business. And a mutable business is a business that is in a constant state of reinvention, and that spans technology, people, supply chain. And to me, this is kind of the very logical next step, to say, Let's stop talking about digital transformation. Let's use concepts like mutable, because then we can get the whole organization involved, because it's never just been about technology. Everybody who works in IT says the hardest thing in technology is people. So it's about everybody in the organization. And this is kind of how I see thinking evolving. And I think this mutable business concept is a nice way to put it, because the whole organization is transforming and it's doing it continually. So then you can start to think about, what do we need to put in place in order to do that?
Yeah, and you said a little bit earlier also, it's always these projects, and one must realize that the only thing that makes something a project is because it's got a start and an end date.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Agile, is the fact that actually Agile is not a project management methodology or method or whatever you want to call it, because there's no end date. So you can call it continual improvement if you want to. But I think we need that level of thinking and flexibility, and just saying, I like that, immutable. That's a really good concept. Okay, now I've got something new to go and Google.
Yeah. Always thinking. But and thinking about agile behaviors, one of the things that I think we maybe miss as an industry is, it's hard. Because we do this in my businesses, and quite often it's me, and I'm the one that's guilty of doing it, and I keep saying to the team, we need to be doing experiments. We need to be trying things in a sort of a small, safe way. If it works, we'll do it more. If it doesn't work, right, what's the next idea? We'll do it for a while, but then, business as usual takes over. Something happens that we all need to react to. We end up bogged down in something that's much bigger than it needs to be. And reinforcing that behavior continually is difficult. And you go into these businesses that have printed out the Agile Manifesto and stuck it on the wall, and they think that it's this constant reinforcement doesn't happen, because we've done our agile implementation. That's it now. We don't need to do anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, and then there's other things that we keep on doing, because it makes me think of. Do you remember the John Cleese business videos? There was one about the daily meeting. He did a bunch of videos. To teach people about how not to do things in business. And one of these, he actually went to a shrink and say, he doesn't know, people don't engage. We have this daily meeting and nobody says anything. So the shrink said to him, so why do you have the meetings? He says, but it's the daily meeting. So if we can only do transformation like that, yeah, so you actually go and check it out. It's quite hilarious. There's some really awesome ones.
I'll go have a look for that.
So, I mean, yes, but how do one establishes that culture of, or can one? I want to say make, but you can't say make. That's the wrong word. Get people to constantly want to change. I mean, there's some people that like it. I think people like me with attention deficit, we love it because everything needs to be different every day. But most people find that very, very hard, this issue of non-stability.
But do they? Or is this another one of the stories that have just become accepted? Because I mean, if you think about, and I'm really talking about our industry here, because there's other industries that I have less experience of, where things have to progress in a certain way. When we talk about flexible working, we're not necessarily talking about people in restaurants because they can't work from home, but how many people do you know in our industry, in office-based, what would be classed as bullshit jobs quite often, who are literally
The book is
just,
lying on my table, by the way.
that article is life-changing. But that they are bored quite often. They feel burnt out, but that's because they are not necessarily motivated. They have been told, you're not allowed to do that, you have to do this, you have to go to the daily meeting, and they are making up the numbers, counting down the hours, and what a depressing use of time that is. There's a friend of mine who worked for a consulting organization in the UK, and she was just wasted there. And she, she was being well paid, so to a certain extent she was trapped in that role. It came with sort of, the location was very good for her as well, but the use that the company was making of her and her giant brain was just nothing. She could maybe not have turned up and people wouldn't have noticed, and that's a genuinely sad situation. So I don't think it's that people resist change. I don't think we put them in structures that enable them to feel safe, enable them to identify different ways of doing things. There are fundamental changes required to how we build our organizations.
Yeah. And I think okay, I'm going to use the expression now again. You hit the nail on the head there. It's, yeah, if you cannot make a difference, and you've tried to make a difference, and nobody cares, why should you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so sad. I mean, yeah, who's it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or let's rather go to Hertzberg. I like Hertzberg because it's simple. It's two things that I need to remember: hygiene factors and motivators. Okay, and there's tons of people who's got all the hygiene factors they need, but they have a miserable existence, and I'm using that word purposefully, because none of the motivators are there. They cannot make a difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's actually very sad.
It is. It's a disgraceful waste of people's intelligence, and it frustrates me. And if we look at it from a Maslow perspective, this is quite a well-paid industry. So most people are getting a wage that is sufficient to clothe them, feed them, allow them to live the lifestyle that they want to live. And the question that comes after that is, so then what motivates you? You and I, and Suzanne van Hove and Doug Tedder and a huge group of people, we worked all the hours on the Verizon project for little to no recompense, but we loved it and we were motivated. And that was something that, I still look back on working with that whole team as an absolute privilege. It was a joy in the conversations that we had. My brain was just buzzing. That's motivation. Imagine giving that to people with a salary as well. It's just, it's a game changer.
I'm going to tell you a quick story, which I often tell CXOs. So, you employ people and you actually go and do a bit of research, because you need to understand these new roles in your organization. And then you speak to other people and you gather some information, and you go and sit with HR and you draw up a spec, and you advertise it. And there's first interview, second interview, third interview, psychometric tests, and you get the perfect person to fit this specific role that you've created in the organization. And then they start and you tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it normally takes a few seconds before that actually hits home.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, I mean, there's very few product positions anymore, or at least pure product positions anymore. And the moment you say service industry, you actually start talking about knowledge workers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how depressing is it if you prepared your for a lifetime of doing meaningful things, and you get told what to do.
And I'm not saying I'm not, I'm not saying either that every second of work is joyful, and I think this is something that we can both relate to because we are running our own businesses. So when you run your own business, you do have a lot more choice about what you do, and I get to spend my time working on things that motivate me and that I enjoy. But at the same time, I still need to do the accounts. I still need to do the VAT return. These things have to happen, but collectively, I have a package that I enjoy working with and that fulfills me intellectually, which I've not had that in a lot of the permanent jobs that I've done, because the machine takes over and you become a cog in a system, and it is very challenging to then move beyond that. And I don't want to be a backseat host here, but hello David, hello Alan, thank you for watching. And Alan's saying he's always seen IT as being the ambassadors of change, and it's up to us to present change in as positive a way as possible. And I think that's a really interesting comment, because quite often you see a lot of this, these new ways of working in the IT department. We're always keen to try new things, and Agile's one of the ones that's kind of bleeding across into the business. But I'm trying to think where this change should sit. You know, who should be looking across the organization and saying, how do we do things differently? How do we improve? It's certainly not HR in most organizations that I work
No,
with.
it's not.
Where is our center for innovation?
Yeah, and I would love to say that that's actually the role of a more. Sorry, Alan, I had to put my glasses on, otherwise I can't see what you're writing. I saw there were things moving there, but I didn't see what it was. Apologies. I would love to say that shouldn't that be the sort of a role of a CIO, but I think in too many organizations, the CIO still doesn't have the ear of the rest of the organization, even though we all know it's important and whatever. But maybe that's the new role of a CEO, is to become less operational. Actually, a CEO should be less operational and more strategic. Okay, that's their role. Their role is to drive the organization forward.
I think it might have been Simon Kent. When he was CIO, his role was Chief Innovation Officer. And perhaps that's where the focus needs to be, because Alan's saying here that anytime other departments run into an acronym that starts with IT, they're not interested. So ITIL, ITSM, and I get that, absolutely. But at the same time, how much of the marketing department's budget is actually spent on tech? How much are they spending on software and Google Ads? And so I can see digital is a more accessible term than IT. But at the same time, if we put digital in front of everything, it just becomes like IT. It just becomes this phrase that's going to turn people off.
Yeah. Do you know what's one of the things that I've been doing lately is I'm when I have conversations with CXO level is to say, okay, so what's your innovation budget? They say, what? People need to do that within their own budget. I said, no, it shouldn't be. your organization should have an innovation budget.
Yeah,
And maybe that's one
absolutely.
of the ways to make it happen, is to that managerial utility. I want part of that budget. I'll be innovative. uh, yeah, but I think there's so many questions that we still have to answer. Um, and it is really, really a complex problem, but we need to
Mm,
solve it.
yep.
Because those oaks that you just talked about, that's desperately wanting to go back to normal,
Mm,
they're not going to be here tomorrow.
no.
You know what the sad thing is the amount of people's lives that will be impacted by that.
Mm,
It is, yeah, it's heart wrenching for me to think about the amount of people who's going to lose their jobs because the leadership of the organization just didn't think or care enough
mm,
to do something about this. And I'm
yeah.
being blunt about it. I mean, actually, they didn't care enough to do something about this.
Mm. And there's we've been talking about business changes so far, but there's also individual impact here, and a question about whether perhaps employment as we currently think about it is changing or will change. Because again, if I look at my parents' generation, the idea was that you got a job, you progressed with the same company, and eventually you retired with a lovely pension and went off to raise pigeons or whatever it might be. And I always remember, because you'll know from my introduction, I was changing jobs pretty much once a year at the beginning of my career, because I was always looking for the next thing, the next motivation. And every time I went to see my parents, I said, "Oh, I've got a new job, it's more money, it's more interesting." And my mum was just horrified, because she was used to this idea of safety and stability, and this concept of change was just wasn't for her. And that's kind of one option, is moving from role to role. But now there's this concept of, portfolio careers, the gig economy, multiple streams of income. Passive income, of course, is the dream, the money that's coming in while you're asleep. But the traditional business model is, we have our employees and they are a liability, they cost us money. But once we look at people as individuals who can potentially work multi-portfolio, then this unlocks a whole new way of thinking, and this becomes more interesting as well. And it's not deliberate; it's kind of accidental, the way that I've run my own business. But we've never particularly had permanent staff. Everything's always been outsourced, and for us, it's reduced our central administrative overhead, but it's also allowed us to be very flexible and scalable. So, for example, our help desk is provided by a company that uses staff who are based in Macedonia, and we have two dedicated resources who work with us full time, in effect as part of our team. But then we also have shared resources who allow us to run a 24/7 help desk at a fraction of the cost that it would be in the UK. We couldn't afford to do what we do in the UK, but that's people. It's us taking advantage of the global economy, but it's also people who are able to work multi-portfolio, and they then become a completely different proposition. It's a different proposition for them as an individual. It's a different proposition for the organization that employs them. So it comes back to this question, everything, why are we doing things like we're doing? Why do we employ people in the way that we do? What could we do that could make people's lives more interesting?
Yeah, and it's interesting that some economies instinctively, or should I rather, is it economies or cultures? I don't know. But in the Netherlands, they reckon, yeah, close to 40% of the knowledge worker pool
Mm-hmm.
are already ZZP zelfstandig. I don't know what the first Z is for, but it's the other one is for what is zelfstandig? Zelfstandige persoon. But basically somebody that relies on their own smarts and whatever. And there's a tax category for that. And there's incentives for that. Well, maybe that's also part of it, is the government actually realizes that that's a way to get more people actually gainfully employed. And if you actually look at the employment figures of the Netherlands versus other countries of a similar size, both in population and in terms of GDP, their employment figures are really impressive.
Yeah. And so we move them from business to the individual through to government as well. And this is another, and I'm not saying for a second I've got the answers. I've just got questions. But you look at concepts like universal basic income and you think genuinely what would happen? What would people choose to do if they didn't have to do what they do every day? And I remember having a conversation with somebody who was a business owner, and he was saying, if everybody had universal basic income, nobody would do anything. Why would you? There's no incentive to do anything. But this is somebody who is working super hard to build a business, and that puts him into higher tax brackets. He's choosing to pay more tax when he could just sit there at the lower tax level. And it's,
you could be on the dole. Yeah.
And that was, back in the sort of 70s and 80s. That was how a lot of British musicians and artists funded what their passion was. They got just enough money to allow them to do the thing that genuinely set their world on fire.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept for me. I don't know. It depends on the day whether I'm subscribed to theory X or theory Y. Yeah, so I think people with little stress tends to be good. But the moment you just add a little bit of stress, but let's come back to organizations, the leadership of an organization. So let's think about practically what should excuse me, the leadership of an organization do to facilitate positive change, constant positive change. Is there something that we can do? Do we need to change the way that we remunerate people? Do we need to change roles and responsibilities? I don't know. Drucker used to say, "What gets measured gets done." Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. And then you read things like Frederick Laloux's work, and you say, "Well, I really like what he's dreaming, but I don't know how doable it is." And I think many of these things is we just don't know, so we speculate. And because we speculate, we refuse to take action. So maybe we should just try and see what happens.
And a lot of it, and this is something that I would never ever in the past have thought I would hear myself saying, is so much of it comes down to governance. And Peter Brooks is another guest who's been on the ITSM crowd a few times, and listening to him talk about governance allowed me to genuinely understand it. So the first thing that the leadership of an organization needs to do is be so clear about what the organization exists for, what its purpose is, or what's acceptable, what's not. And we talked about this in the tourism model as cascading down into the organization as a series of principles that then gave people the freedom to act within those principles. So, if part of your organization is this commitment to low environmental impact, that's not a case of kind of putting stickers on every single printer to say think before you print, but it's coming down into the organization so that people understand when they are taking decisions, this is not acceptable within my organization. You know, this is not what we are here to do. And it's always interesting to me that some of the coolest businesses and the tech businesses are the ones that treat people in the most horrific way, and you know that they're not. I mentioned it on a webinar I did this morning, but Apple and Uber have just been picked up for recording their contact center staff when they're working from home to make sure that they're not, I don't know, enjoying the life
Doing
or anything.
something else.
In particular, and you know, there's got to be a mismatch somewhere. If your organization doesn't exist to treat its people horrifically, something is cascading down that's enabling that type of decision. And you think about the meeting where they had that discussion and went, you know, hey, wouldn't it be great to roll out keystroke trackers so that we can analyze every second that somebody spends at a keyboard? Well, actually, no. If we switch to outcome-based management, genuinely don't care how long you were sat at your keyboard. Did you get your job done?
So here's the problem with that. In many countries, the labor legislation just doesn't allow us to do that. Yeah. So, I specifically spend most of my time in a very strict labor environment. Yeah, a country with very strict labor legislation. And unfortunately, I have to say, this country's productivity is never going to go up until we change that, because there's no incentive to work. Yeah.
Yep.
And because there's no incentive to work, I wonder whether people actually find it meaningful to work, because it's not only why should I, but even if I do, I get treated the same as the person who don't.
Yes.
And that's demotivating.
Yes.
This morning I saw a post on LinkedIn, in fact, that says, there's nothing more demotivating to a good employer than you doing nothing about a bad employee, sorry, not employer.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. Yeah. We just get to the point where we say, Alan, but the problem that we faced with is, let's face it, most of us, or most of the leadership in large organization is Gen X people. Yeah, it's we've been brought up in a certain way, we've been taught a certain way, we've been indoctrinated by business schools, who actually taught us a bunch of terrible management principles and concepts. I mean, the more I go back to my old books, the more I repel in horror in terms of the things that I was taught to be good, and responsible, because none of them were human. And I can't remember who said it. It's most probably, I can't remember who said it. Tom Peters, most probably. The only way to trust somebody is to trust them. So, there's always this argument, but I can't trust people to do things. They must show themselves to be trustworthy. No, you first have to be a leader to show yourself worthy of leading. So it's a very complex problem.
It's huge. And I think that what you mentioned there in terms of labour laws, it's not just an organisational problem. And I think in some countries as well, it starts in school, and it's the education that we're giving to people even before they come into the labour market. Alan's saying the culture of management will change as the younger generation rises through the ranks, and So my stepson is he's 20 now. But every now and then my husband had said to him, I've got a little piece of work that needs doing, and we've got a spreadsheet that needs reformatting or whatever it might be. Do you want to do it? And I'll pay you however much money. And the first time I asked my stepson to do that, my stepson said, yeah, brilliant, did the work really quickly, great. So the next time my husband said to him, oh, I've got another piece of work, do you want to do it? And he said, no, I needed a new phone last time. I needed the money. I don't need the money now. And I think that the motivation is possibly very different, and what personal qualities the next generation will bring to the working environment will be very different as well. And more respect for humans, more respect for mental health, more respect for our environment. I would love to see all that coming through. I hope, I genuinely hope that will be positive. But it's all connected: education, individual drivers, employment, the legislation that surrounds it. It needs to be looked at holistically. And I'm not convinced in the UK that we've got a government that's doing that at the moment, and I think different countries are approaching it in different ways. But there's things that we can try in our own organizations, and absolutely we can put things in place that will enable it. But it's a very individual journey for the organization as well, and what will work for one will not work for the other, which is why it's nice to read about Spotify model and Zappos and Holacracy and whatever else it might be. It's not something you can just drop onto your organization and see the same results.
Yeah, but if we don't try, it's not going to happen. And
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
I think that's most probably the biggest problem at the moment. There's far too little trying.
But we have we have this point, this point in time, which, blimey, I hope we never experience in our lifetimes again. But we've had this period of huge change across all organizations, so we then now have an opportunity to try some new things. And this is why I get really cross when I see everybody back to the office or nobody back to the office. We've got an opportunity to build an organization that works for everybody. Each organization has an opportunity to look at what they're doing and reassess and find new ways of doing things, find new ways to collaborate, find new ways to share. One of the things that's been interesting about everybody home working is how liberated more introverted team members have felt, because there's been this real trend in the last couple of years for the stand up and the whiteboard, and we're going to have a big freewheeling conversation about this. And the more introverted people in teams actually feel quite cut off from that, but have the same conversation in Slack or use a Miro board. There's an opportunity for them to contribute. So there's things that we can do to create collaborative methods that work for everyone.
And if you, as a final message, need to say to a CEO, this is what these three things you can use to either check that something is transformation or is not transformation. What would be the three things that you choose?
When you say three things, what ask me that question again.
Give a CEO a checklist to check all of their projects that they call digital transformation, to check whether it is or not.
Oh, blimey.
Okay, that's a blind one because it's blindsiding you.
Yeah, a checklist to see if it's a digital transformation. I would say, is it linked to business purpose rather than just bringing in a new piece of technology? Does it have clearly defined outcomes? And how are you measuring the results? Which is fairly generic to any project. But I think if we've treated this thing like a project plan, we have to look at it and say, well, where were we actually hoping to get to with this? And I think for many organizations, or in my experience anyway, that's not a question they can answer because they've jumped on a bandwagon. But the bigger thing for me is moving beyond this focus on technology and asking where it is that they are trying to go as an organization, and they'll need technology for that, but they'll need to bring the rest of the organization with them as well.
Yeah. I think you're right. It all starts with why. Sorry, I am a big Simon Sinek fan. Okay. And I think CEOs need to go out and buy the following book. It's the new one from him, The Infinite Game. And we need to stop playing finite games. And we need to start thinking long term. And long term is what's really quite interesting for me is that in spite of all the negative things that you can say about communist planning or whatever, one thing that the communists did well, and I'm not a communist, by the way, I'm a diehard capitalist, is they were able to plan intergenerational. And I think that's the role of a CEO today, is they need to think about, as you say, purpose. Where's the organization going to be 3 generations from now?
Yeah.
And if everybody does that, any generation does that, then we are playing the infinite game.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you feel that you need to get off your chest before I keep my promise to you and make it 1 hour?
I think I've probably talked enough. I will just say hello, Peter, as well, because it's Peter's a big proponent of organizations being more than just revenue generating entities and looking at what our businesses are doing for society and the environment as well. And so pleasure to have you with us as well, Peter.
Yeah, I miss my check-in every time I went down to Cape Town. I always checked in with Mr. Brooks. And now he's sitting in your neck of the woods. So hopefully if you travel through the Midlands, you'll stop and check in with him.
Definitely.
A pleasure, brother. So, Claire, thank you very much for your time. It was a wonderful chat, and we definitely need to do this again. And I think actually this conversation needs to be taken further. We've most probably today just came up with a list of big things that we need to answer, questions.
Yes.
But, if you have the questions, it's maybe a good starting point. So have a wonderful evening. Thanks for making time to spend time with us.
Thank you for the invite.
Hope to see you soon again.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.